morning, and welcome to our Sunday morning forum. We hold this forum each Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. at Fellowship Bible Church, Middleburg, Florida. Welcome.
I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich, and I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life.
Beginning now with verse 9, Revelation chapter 2, we ask this question: what does Jesus know about the Christians in Smyrna? Jesus said, "I know your works." Jesus knew the works of the church in Ephesus also, as we read in Revelation 2:2. In Smyrna, Jesus also knew their works, tribulations, and poverty. He knows these hardships both in the sense that he saw what happened to them and in the sense that he knew their hardships by personal experience. Let's look now at the word poverty. Now, according to history, Smyrna was a prosperous city, yet the Christians were poor, and you have to ask why. Walvoord writes,
"The word used for poverty is the word for abject poverty."
the Christians of Smyrna knew poverty because they were robbed and fired from their jobs in persecution for the gospel. Early Christians joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have an enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. Reference Hebrews chapter 10, verse 34. Even today, this is a common form of persecution against Christians. Jesus goes on to say, "But you are rich." The contrast between material poverty and spiritual riches of the Christians in Smyrna reminds us that there is nothing inherently spiritual in being rich. Nevertheless, there is also nothing inherently spiritual in being in poverty. Material riches are an obstacle to the kingdom of God, an obstacle that some do not overcome. Reference Mark 10, verses 23 through 25. There is nothing wrong with having money. The trouble is that money is so easily as us. Often material riches are acquired and maintained at the expense of true spiritual riches. A story is told of the glory days of the Renaissance papacy, when a man walked with the Pope and marveled at the splendor and riches of the Vatican. The Pope told him, "We no longer have to say what Peter told the lame man, 'Silver and gold I have none.'" His companion replied, "But neither can you say, 'Rise up and walk.'" Little joke there, a little humor. All right, what about rich? The church of Smyrna was also rich in leadership. One of the pastors of the church was named Polycarp. He was one of the Apostle John's disciples and served in Smyrna until AD 155, when he died heroically as a martyr. We will be reading the story on that in verse 11 to follow.
Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life.
This verse tells us what Jesus wants the Christians in Smyrna to do. Let's look at the first phrase. Do not fear. Literally, this is better translated, stop being afraid. The Christians in Smyrna suffered under persecution, and they were afraid. Sometimes we think that Christians who endure persecution are almost superhuman, and we sometimes don't appreciate the depth of fear they struggle with. There were things which they were about to suffer, and Jesus wanted them to be ready to stand against those things. Next phrase is, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison. Devil in Greek is diablos, meaning false accuser in this context. Notice that Jesus described the nature of the persecution that would come against the Christians in Smyrna. Apparently, they would be imprisoned, and for a specific period of time. According to Jesus, the persecution about to come against the Christians of Smyrna was from the devil. The Greek devil is diablos, an accuser, a slanderer. From the root word diablo, to accuse, to malign, is one of the names of Satan. From the English word devil is derived and should be applied only to Satan, meaning deceiver, as a proper name. At the same time, it was measured and limited by God. This just goes to show us that God is supreme. He has the last word. Isaiah describes the fallen angel, the one who desired to have a throne of that of God or above God. He describes it in this way. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, literally day star, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. Surely the devil wanted to imprison them for a long time, but God limited the tribulation to 10 days. The Greek word for tribulation is paschao, meaning suffer. In this context, being thrown into prison was severe persecution. In that day, prison was never used to rehabilitate someone and rarely used to punish someone. Normally, you were thrown into prison as you awaited trial and execution. Barclay writes,
For a man to become a Christian anywhere was to become an outlaw. In Smyrna, above all places, for a man to enter the Christian church was literally to take his life in his hands. In Smyrna, the church was a place for heroes.
This tribulation does not mean the common trials to which all flesh is heir. Some dear souls think they are bearing their cross every time they have a headache. The tribulation mentioned here is trouble they would not have had if they had not been Christians.
because God had the purpose in their suffering, and so he allowed it. God uses suffering to purify. Reference 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7. To make us like Jesus. Paul writes in Romans 8:17. And to make us truly witnesses of him. In all ages, the blood of the martyrs has been seed for the church. Once again, quoting Vance Havner.
The saints at Smyrna had not been given a pep talk on how to win friends and influence people. They had no testimony on how faith made me mayor of Smyrna. They were not promised deliverance from tribulation, poverty, and reviling. In fact, the worst was yet to come.
Most specifically in this case, God allowed this attack so that they may be tested in the sense of being proven. Even though God allows bad things to happen to his chosen, the outcome is good. Through their suffering, God displayed the true riches of the church in Smyrna to everyone, including themselves, even though he knew they were rich already. Christians in Smyrna would be tested, but they passed the test. This church, compared to other six, has no evil spoken against it. Only this church among the seven survive today. And it has survived through centuries of Roman and Muslim persecution. God also tests us. We may not have the same opportunity to suffer for Jesus that the Christians in Smyrna had, but we can have their same heart. We may never be in a place to die as a martyr, but we can all live a martyr's life. Sadly, many Christians and Christian churches avoid persecution of any kind by conforming so much to the world that they have lost their first love. This wasn't the case with the Christians in Smyrna. They were tested and they passed the test. Jesus goes on to say, "Be faithful unto death, I will give you the crown of life." What Jesus said to this church is important, but what he didn't say is also important. Jesus didn't have a single word of rebuke or correction for the Christians in Smyrna. All he had was a promise of a crown and the encouragement to be faithful until death. There are two different words for crown in the ancient Greek language. One described the kind of crown a king would wear, a crown of royalty. The other kind of crown, the Stephanos, used here, is given as a trophy to a winner in athletic competition. Jesus looks at the Christians of Smyrna and says to them, "You are my winners. You deserve a trophy." The Stephanos was also the crown worn at a marriage and a special celebration. The picture here is of Jesus and his bride, each wearing their crowns. The promise of a crown was especially meaningful for the Christians in Smyrna. The city of Smyrna had a crown of beautiful buildings on the top of a Mount Pagos. In Smyrna, worshippers of pagan gods wore crowns. In the culture, good citizens and winning athletes received crowns. Jesus promised a special crown, the crown of life. A champion athlete receives a crown of leaves, which would soon get brown and die. Jesus' champions receive a crown of life.
A crown without cares, corrivals, envy, end. Kings' crowns are so weighty with cares, that oft they make their heads ache. Not so with this crown, the joys whereof are without measure or mixture.
He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death.
In verse 11, we see Jesus making a promise to those who have an ear. Though the Spirit has something to say to us through every one of the churches, this letter is to the Christians in Smyrna may apply least of all to the modern Western Christians. To this point, we simply don't face the kind of persecutions that the Christians in Smyrna experienced. Polycarp was a remarkable example of both the persecution and the courage of the early Christians. Nevertheless, the days of martyrs is definitely not past. All over the world, Christians face persecution, especially in Asia, Eastern Europe, and in the Muslim world. Some people estimate that more Christians have suffered and died for their faith in the 20th century than all previous centuries combined. A May 1994 news item illustrates this. The gruesome martyrdom of a pastor in central India led several hundred conversions to Christianity. A former Hindu who had changed his name to Paul James was murdered by a crowd of extremists as he spoke in a field to a February 20 church service in Falabani district. Jesus forgive them, he was heard to say. Eyewitness said that James called out as his assailants cut off his hands and legs and severed his torso. The attackers also decapitated James, an outspoken believer who had planted 27 churches. The murder has drawn heavy media attention in the area, which is charged with Hindu-Muslim tensions. Some, but not all, of James's assailants reportedly have been caught. The attackers hated the violence have left many Indians wanting to emulate the love shown by this victim. The next phrase, he who overcomes. This was a promise for overcomers. But what were they to overcome? The promise is for those who overcome the threat of persecution and the presence of persecution. We might say that we overcome by our close association with Jesus, who is the ultimate overcomer. After all, he overcame death itself. As Jesus said, in the world you have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. John 16:33. The next phrase, shall not be hurt by the second death. Those who overcome in Jesus will never be hurt by the second death. The second death is hell, the lake of fire, Revelation 20:14 and 21:8. Though Satan threatened to attack their life, Jesus promises his overcomers that death is conquered for them. Barclay writes,
the second death was a Jewish rabbinic expression for the total extinction of the utterly wicked.
This was kind of a long segment. I know I promised to keep them short, but it was important to keep Smyrna under one heading and one video. Next week, we will begin our study for Pergamos. And I think you'll find that an interesting study. So until we meet again next week, this is Bill signing off. God bless.